One of the maddening things about being in a toxic relationship is how character disorders argue, or rather, how they don't argue, how they avoid arguing, how they make you run around in circles so that there is nothing useful or helpful in this conversation. Well, today we're going to get into why that happens and what you can do about it. And I'm so thrilled that you guys are here joining me. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I am a licensed psychologist with over 25 years of counseling of working on one-on-one with people. And today we're going to get into how not to lose your cool when dealing with somebody who's toxic or provocative, somebody who's not arguing in good faith. And that's one of the danger points is we get into these relationships or we get into these conversations thinking the other person is invested in finding resolution. No, often they're not. They're just interested in keeping you provoked, stirred up, and chaos running. So thank you so much for being here with me today. If you're new to me, I would love to have you follow or maybe like this. You might even want to share it with somebody that you know who's dealing with a very conflictual person. This is going to be a conversation. We're going to talk about what it is to actually mean to lose your cool. How's that differ from being just upset? What happens internally? Why do we do that? Why do we lose so much control over ourselves? And what do we do when the other person doesn't react in the way that we expect? How do we make sense of that? Where do we go from that? And why do how do immature people act towards us that can actually really stir situations up? We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about why people provoke angers in other people, like what kind of people are purposefully antagonistic. And if you haven't listened to to Bill Eddy's conversation yesterday, I would really urge you to check out because he talks about the 5 people who are most likely to ruin your life. Well, I'm actually going to get into 5 types as well, but they're not going to be the same 5 types that Bill Eddy identifies in the interview that was in the podcast, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. And then we're going to talk about why do people elicit this reaction? What are they actually looking for? If it's not resolution, then what's the intent in this conversation? And and then we're going to talk about a checklist. If you'd like to know what is a person's motives, how to determine it, I'm going to give you a little checklist to how to figure out what's happening and actually help you to manage it when you're really upset and you're stirred up. So that's where we're going to go with today's live. I'm so thrilled that you're here with me. We're going to be here for the next hour. So thank you so much. I hope that you'll stick around. And like I said, I hope you will share like this as a way to be able to make sense of this for yourself. Yes, I just started this. Somebody asked, did you just start this? Yes, this is the top of the live. So I'm really glad that you're here, Green Lady, that you've come in at the top of the live. So that's really awesome. So let's get into first. I know this may feel like an obvious question, but I want to first define what it is that's between losing your cool and just being upset, because here's the reason why I think it matters. Toxic people will accuse you when you're upset of losing your cool when you haven't. You're just upset. It's as if you're not allowed to have any kind of reaction. And because you have a reaction, they immediately tag that as difficult, as too much. And they'll attack you for simply having some type of an emotion. Hey, so good to see you, Mommy Whisperer. I'm so glad that you're joining the live today. Thank you for that. So here's the difference between losing your cool and just having a reaction, which is a normal thing. Reactions are quick surge of emotions when something that somebody says hits your nerve. You may notice that your heart races, or maybe your jaw tightens. Maybe you feel the urge to defend yourself. It's a biological event that the body has registered as a threat or an injustice or an injury of some kind. But losing your cool, like really losing it, that goes a step further. That's when your reaction takes the wheel and starts to actually direct your behavior. That's when you snap. Maybe you're going to over explain. Maybe you get sarcastic, or you cry, or you plead. And now what's happened is the other person's emotional state or behavior is dictating you. In that moment, you no longer have the emotional lead over yourself, and you essentially handed it to the other person. So reacting, you may feel the heat, but lose your cool is when you actually throw yourself into the fire. That's the difference of how you know when you're actually just reacting and when you're actually emoting, when you're responding to the reaction. So, why do we sometimes react? Well, first of all, it's important to know why your body even responds at all. It's because of the fight or flight system, the survival mechanism that's in all of us. It lights up when it detects threat and it begins to mobilize you for danger. So, it's actually a stress response that says, oops, there may be something really bad going on. So, if you were under some kind of a situation of jeopardy right now, it prepares you to respond with all the necessary mobilization, all the necessary defenses that you need. You need to have your blood pumping. You need to be able to move quickly. It's enabling you to do that. Unfortunately, when that happens, though, the part of your brain that has to do with the thinking, decision making, planning, strategizing, that actually goes offline in that moment. So you have it makes it very hard to think logically when your body's reacting because it's in a fight or flight mode. But also, what happens when this happens is somebody just wrote in and said, I lose my cool. I have a hard time controlling my emotions. Often that's because our emotional history gets activated too. You're not just reacting to this moment, you're also reacting to every other similar moment like this in the past. So if you've experienced a lot of emotional invalidation, maybe you've had manipulation or past trauma, your nervous system recognizes that as familiar and sounds the alarm even faster. That's why some provocations are a lot harder to control than others because they're echoing an old injury. So there's two things that determine your reaction when you're feeling threatened. Your internal state, which is based upon how much sleep you got, whether or not you're under stress, maybe the hormonal situation that you're in, and prior experiences. But also what matters is your interpretation of the trigger. Like, do you see it as a threat? Have you ever noticed, for example, that you can be in an audience with people and you all see the same provocation, the same sort of situation, and each of you will react differently? Maybe one of you will lose the cool, maybe the other one will break out laughing, maybe somebody else is like, "Well, whatever," and walks away. Why do they do that? Well, that's because each person who's in that situation has a different interpretation of the trigger. So one of the things that makes you more reactive may be your past history and the way you're choosing to see it. So when your body feels safe and you feel like you have enough internal resources, you have the ability within you to pause and respond. But when you're coming from a state of depletion, or you're feeling flooded, or you're feeling threatened, you're more likely to be in that moment, lose your cool with whoever is provoking you. So, how come? How does this interpretation happen? How does some of us, have the lens in which we find these situations funny, and somebody else may really find it threatening? So, here's some things that kind of can shape the way that we see and experience whatever's coming at us. So, if you grew up in a safe home where the home was good natured and things were sort of like sarcastic comments were seen as playful and fun, that's gonna teach you not to see this as such an extreme threat. But maybe you grew up in a home where you're mocked and humiliated. You might experience that same comment as shaming. And if you grew up in a home that was critical, you might feel that it's attacking and react defensively. So your personal history shapes how you interpret what you experience in your life. But also your core beliefs and your self-concept acts as a lens as well. So your emotional brain acts whenever whatever's happening, it says, "What does this say about me?" And if your core belief is that I'm safe and likable, you're likely to brush off the awkward comment as just that. But if your core self says, I don't ever really feel good enough, you're more likely to feel a lot of shame. And if your core self says, you know what, I feel like people try to control me a lot, you're likely to experience that with anger. So your core belief and your self concept lens will literally shift the way that you view this. Kind of view it literally like different wearing different glasses. So it depends on the glasses that you wear. Like I said, safe, likable. If you come from a natural positive angle, you're likely to not make a whole lot of it. If you come from the angle of you feeling not quite good enough, you might activate shame. And if you come from the angle of feeling like people are always trying to control you, you're going to take it from the angle of anger. But your nervous system it also is playing a massive role. So you have a natural temperament and a biological wiring that makes you sensitive to some things and not to others. Some people have a more reactive nervous system. That's what one of the commenters just pointed out. Their nervous system tends to overfire and it takes longer to calm down. So you may have less of a break to stop you from feeling the threat to responding. So it's not always a matter of willpower. Sometimes it's how efficiently your brain can toggle between the survival mode and self regulation. And then there's culture and learned emotional norms. So if you were raised in a situation in which feeling negative emotions or intense emotions are acceptable. I think, for example, if you're in Italy, maybe they're really loud and they're like, willing to do that to each other. You might find that that's just what everybody does and it doesn't mean a whole lot. But you may be in another situation in which no emotion is shown. And in that situation, any type of emotion may feel very threatening, very triggering, maybe even shameful because it wasn't allowed. And maybe you were grown up in a situation where you're just constantly vulnerable and made to feel very unsafe. So then the default setting may be to see the offense rapidly and then to become very move in that direction of self-protection. So in other words, I really want you to hear that your interpretation that you give to something, it depends upon a lot of mix of issues. It's biology involved, there's history, and there's also your interpretation. So what may be overreactive to one person may make perfect sense to somebody else because you understand what's happening between these three interplays. So, okay. So what are some common triggers that emotionally immature people, in other words, character disordered individuals use as a way to evoke an emotional response in a lot of people? So I want to kind of outline things that really tend to set a lot of us off so that you can begin to recognize them so that you have more control over seeing when it happens. You can say, you know what? This is likely to really stir me up. I need to maybe take a breath. Maybe I need to ground myself. Maybe I need to really even step back and take a pause. Because, here's the thing, emotionally immature people, in other words, AKA character disordered individuals, don't just act out, they're trying to pull you in. Their goal, whether it's a conscious one or not, is to offload their discomfort rather than face it. They want you to feel those emotions because they can't tolerate them in themselves. They want you to feel the fear, the shame, the helplessness, the guilt, and the inadequacy. That's intentional. So here are some ways that there's some methods that they use to really pull us in. So watch out for these. The first is blame and deflection. This is when they twist the situation in order to make you the problem. So if you express hurt, they'll say, "You're always so sensitive," or "Why do you have to react?" Or what my ex like to say is, "Do you need to make every storm in every teacup?" So they have a way of making you feel like your reaction is the problem. And this instantly puts you on the defense and makes you want to debate about the emotional validity of your behavior. Watch out for that. That's intentional. So be careful when you're starting to feel misunderstood or falsely accused, especially if you've grown up in a situation where you need to prove your innocence or your worth. You're going to be very vulnerable to this. Then there's mocking and minimization. This is when they downplay your pain or make light of a serious issue. They'll say, "It's just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" Or "You're being so dramatic." This dismissive stance often will either provoke shame or anger, but both of them is intended to keep you explaining why your feelings matter. And if you've grown up in a situation where you felt a lot of invalidation, it will make your nervous system fight in order to be seen. You'll feel very provoked in that situation. Number three, this is when there's guilt trip or martyrdom. This is a person who makes the victim because you have a boundary. They'll say something like, "After all I've done for you," or "I guess I'm just the bad guy here." In other words, what they're doing is they're reversing a role and suddenly you feel cruel for protecting yourself. The trigger here is empathy and your conscience, which you're trying to exploit in order to regain control. Number four, and some of you have already mentioned this, is stonewalling or the silent treatment. This is when they've withdrawn affection or communication in order to make you chase them for resolution or even just chase them for connection. My ex loved this one. He pulled this one out constantly. What it does is it creates an emotional tension that builds inside of you until you cave, you apologize, or you over explain just to repair the piece. Let me say it again. This creates so much emotional tension that you finally it builds to the point where you cave, you apologize, or you over explain just to restore the peace. What they're doing is to you is they're using anxiety as a way to create around the disconnection so that you start to interpret the silence or the withdrawal as danger. And I know that's how I felt. I felt like I knew he was coming back, but I also knew he was up to no good. He used stonewalling to go act out. So that was when I was most at risk. But maybe in your case, the stonewalling is more, the silent treatment is more around to punish you, or maybe for you to feel like you're not worthy of being seen, that you don't exist, or maybe even made you feel like they're threatening the relationship. But it's to trigger insecurity and fear of abandonment. So here, I'm sorry, it's to trigger, yeah, it's as to trigger it as danger. Number 5 is they provoke competition or jealousy. This is when they'll mention somebody else who understands them better, or they'll compare you to somebody in some unfavorable light. And what it's doing is designed to erode your confidence and make you fight for their approval. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to trigger insecurity so that you feel like you have to somehow overcome that or prove that you're worth that, or they're going to make you feel less than somebody else and make you worry that maybe they're going to abandon you for that other person. Number 6 is gaslighting and denial of reality. What they'll outright deny what happened, even if you have proof. I know so many of you have described like I can prove they did that. I even may have footage of them doing it, but they'll still act like they never did it. They'll just it's almost ridiculous how they outright deny something. They'll say things like, "It never happened," or "You're remembering it wrong." What this doing is it's destabilizing your sense of trust in your own perception, which is one of the fastest ways to induce panic or self-doubt. And what they're doing to you is creating cognitive dissonance so that your brain scrambles to try to reconcile the conflicting reality between what you know to be true and what they're implying to be true. Number 7 is sudden rage or emotional outbursts. They'll explode and they'll use this explosion as a way to silence you. So when someone flies off the handle, our nervous system immediately shifts into survival mode, trying to prioritize safety over self expression. So what it does is it triggers fear in you, especially if you've had past experiences that have taught you that anger equates danger. So notice how the emotionally immature, character disordered people provoke a reaction that makes it hard for you to emotionally regulate. It's because they can't manage their own distress. So what they do is they project it outward so that you carry it for them. And the more reactive you become, and I know you've seen this, the more reactive you become, the more stable they feel temporarily. Like you guys have seen that, that video where they provoke you, push you, push you, push you. Finally, you explode, and then out comes the camera and they start to tape you, and they have that calm demeanor. Maybe they're even grinning. And that's because you stabilize them by becoming reactive. So, what kind of people do this to other people? Well, there are like I'm sorry, I keep saying doctor. Bill Eddy identified 5 types yesterday in the Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse podcast, which is available both on audio wherever you listen to your favorite podcast episode, but it's also available on YouTube. It's called The 5 Types of People Who Ruin Your Life. He identifies antisocial, narcissists, paranoid, the borderline personality, as well as the histrionic. But I want to introduce 5 others that also will ruin your life or really possibly provoke you into acting out. And I'm so glad you guys said that you liked the episode, that you thought it was a good interview. The first is the emotionally immature. Those are the people who've never really fully learned how to handle discomfort, so they dump it on other people. When they feel shame or fear or inadequacy, they'll provoke anger in you as a way to shift the attention away from their own feelings. So anger in you means relief for them because it's distracting them from their inner chaos. So in other words, this is what it basically says. They would rather be the cause of the storm than rather face their own emptiness. Yeah, pathetic. The second type is the narcissistic or entitled. They crave emotional superiority and emotional control. So if they make you lose your cool, they feel calmer because they're clever and above it all. So your emotional reaction becomes the proof that they hold power over you. So think of it this way: your frustration feeds their ego. It's the fuel that they're using as validation of their superiority. The third type is the passive aggressive. This is a person who fears open conflict, but they still want to express resentment and control. So instead of speaking to it directly, they use subtle kind of irritants like backhanded compliments or lateness or forgetting or not showing up for a big commitment. Your anger gives them the permission to say, "See, you're the problem." So they're weaponizing your emotional honesty as a way to avoid any form of accountability. The number fourth type is the chronically insecure or neglected. For some reason, any emotional reaction, even negative for them, feels better than no reaction. They may have grown up feeling unseen or ignored, and they unconsciously equate your anger with attention. So they provoke it as a reliable way to know that they're significant. So they've mistaken intensity between you and them as a way to connect. So they seek intensity as connection. The fifth type is the highly conflictual person. Bill Eddy talks about this is a person who thrives on blame, drama, and emotional escalation. Conflict to them gives their life focus and purpose, and the calmness makes their life feel bearable. So they provoke anger not because they want any type of resolution, but because they want engagement. So they're addicted to the conflict as a form of emotional regulation. So think of it this way: people who provoke anger in you aren't always trying to hurt you, but they're always trying to manage themselves through you. And their chaos stabilizes with your reaction. And I frankly don't want that. I don't want someone stabilizing themselves on the back of myself, because that's just awful. It's in a way parasitic. So what they're doing is they're regulating themselves. It makes them feel powerful. It helps them avoid self-reflection, and they're craving the intensity over intimacy, and they're probably reenacting old patterns. So that then means we're serving as self-regulation for someone who can't do it for themselves. So let's talk about how to be able to determine someone's motive in a situation in which is you're feeling very triggered and flooded. Is it useful or is it not useful? Is there ulterior motives? So here's a checklist you can use to determine what's going on. First, you need to pay attention to the fact that you're feeling triggered or flooded. So get to know what it feels like in your body. I know for me, I feel it in my cheeks. My cheeks get hot. I often feel like a pressure in my chest, or I feel like this rapid, like fast energy inside of me. Notice how activation shows up for you. So ask yourself, when you start to feel that activation, ask yourself, what's happening in my body right now? Maybe your chest is pounding. Maybe it feels tight, or you're feeling a lot of heat. Maybe you're shaking or you feel nauseous. Then label it gently. Say to yourself, I've moved into survival mode. And remind yourself this is a physiological response, not a sign that you're necessarily unsafe. And thank you guys so much for the gifts today. I really appreciate that. I want you to slow down and breathe. Breathing is a fast way for you to take back control over your involuntary survival system, which is automatically moving into a fight or flight mode. The way for you to take the control back is to slow your breathing down, and it will help slow and regulate the rest of you. So take one slow, deliberate exhale, and make your exhales longer than your inhales. And while you're doing that, think about naming 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. And begin to ask yourself, if you can, what story is my brain telling me right now? And is it fact, or is it possibly an interpretation? Number 3, I want you to identify the core emotion that you're feeling. Beneath the anger, there's another feeling. Think of the anger like a top level screen emotion. It's the easiest to feel, but there are things underneath of it. And I want you to think about being underneath the anger and starting to identify other possible feelings. Is it fear? Maybe you're shame. Maybe you're feeling a lot of loss or sadness or grief. If it's anxiety, that's because there's a lack of power or control. Same with fear. Fear means that we feel like we're directly at jeopardy. Sadness or grief may be an indication of something that you feel like you're losing. So ask yourself, I'm feeling what? Name the other feeling. And then begin to try to name it. I'm feeling invisible because they're not listening to me. Or I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling a lot of fear because I feel a threat here. Like there's an underlying, you know, some kind of something here that they're threatening me with. But name the feeling underneath the anger, and then try naming what the threat feels like. Number 4, check whose energy you're holding. Is this yours or did someone project it onto you? And how you'll know is, am I trying to fix it, prove something, earn safety from someone who's not capable of giving it? So ask yourself, what's actually mine right now? For me, I often, when I get into the situations, I think about, did I feel this way before I came into the situation? Or is it something that they're saying really provoking me? And is it they want me to be stirred up? You know how that feels when you're with somebody who already has an agenda, and next thing you know, you're reacting because they've created some kind of like drama with you, but they were already stirred up. Now they've moved it to you. So ask yourself, is this actually mine or am I trying to carry it for someone else? Number 5, choose regulation over and before resolution. This is going to be a hard one, especially for me. I don't like it. I want you to think about not trying to fix a situation until your nervous system feels more calm. Try maybe a reset, like take a walk, splash some water on your face, maybe journal a few sentences, step outside. Revisit the issue when you start to feel like you can speak clearly instead of urgently. So here's one of the things that John and Julie Gottman has noticed in their work is sometimes this can take up to 30 minutes. So you might have to put a pause, like, you know what, that's a very thought-provoking issue that you just brought up. I need to take 30 minutes to ponder it, and then I'm coming back. Always circle back to close it though, if you can, if you think resolution is possible. But really consider that you focus on your regulation first in trying to, instead of focusing on resolution. Number 6, decide on some grounded response. What is the outcome you actually want? Is it peace? Maybe you're looking for understanding. Maybe it's a boundary of some kind. Maybe it's distance from this person or situation. What action gets supported? What action can you do that will actually support that? Maybe it's saying nothing in that moment. Maybe it's just making a brief statement. Maybe it's waiting until you feel better before you say something. You might want to consider using Bill Eddy's CARS mindset. CARS is an acronym, CARS, stands for connect with calmness, analyze your options, respond with facts, and then set limits. So let me go over that again. Connect with yourself with calmness, analyze your options, respond with facts, and set the limits. That's CARS. Number 7 is reflect and recalibrate. So afterwards, ask yourself, what helped me stay grounded? What pulled me out of the alignment in the first place? And note it so that you now have something that is helpful for you, so that you have something that really strengthens you. Actually, I am seeing your comments. I like that. Oh, user. So that's funny. You think that I don't really know what I'm talking about. You're giving me a chance to practice right here in front of you. So I'm sorry that you feel shaky enough for you to feel like you need to call that out in front of everyone. I hope that you have a much better day after today. So here's the 7 points again, just for those who might have missed it. If you're feeling triggered, first of all, recognize that you're feeling triggered. So notice the activation, breathe before you respond, identify the core emotion, check to see whose energy you're holding on to, choose to regulate over resolution, decide on a grounded response, and then reflect and recalibrate. I do use notes. I don't know if you guys know that I use notes. I absolutely use notes. I prep for these. So yeah, that helps me to be able to know how to stay on target. And also gives me a chance to really think about where I want to go in these conversations, because there are a lot of really great questions that I wouldn't think about in the moment, because I get nervous doing this, believe it or not. I know I've done this for years, but I still get nervous every live. So it really is helpful for me to sort of have an outline to be able to use it and then keep me on task while I do it. So why do we say stay struggle to stay calm even when we know better? It's because, for the reasons that I already explained, and is that your brain is being hijacked by their fight or flight. Your old wounds are getting reactivated because we really want resolution. We hate it when someone misunderstands us. It feels miserable when someone misunderstands us because we're willing to even forego resolution over forego regulate being regulated over a resolution. And because a lot of us have been conditioned to overfunction, and when we're experiencing this, we also forget that the other person's tactics is designed to destabilize us on purpose. And we often mistake calm for passivity. We think when we don't do anything that we're letting them win, when really we're not. We're actually resisting the power struggle. So when you're staying calm, you're actually staying in charge of yourself. That's emotional leadership. It's not necessarily surrender. So remember that stillness and sometimes silence isn't necessarily a weakness. Sometimes it's a very effective strategy. The real power comes when you stand in your truth and you don't need to prove it. A lot of us feel we need to prove it. You don't need to validate yourself to anybody with over anything. So here's some reasons why trying to over explain or proving it is really an actually impossibility, because truth doesn't require an agreement to exist. I want to say that again. Truth doesn't require agreement to exist. Just someone because someone denies something doesn't erase that it's happened. Your clarity doesn't need their acknowledgement for it to be true. And when you stop arguing, the truth doesn't vanish. It just stops being up for negotiation. And remember, number two is convincing them keeps you trapped in their frame. The minute you start explaining, they're controlling the dialogue. You've inadvertently accepted their interpretation of things, and you're now trying to explain to change the grid. So you're now performing credibility instead of just living and breathing the truth. And every time you withdraw from that tug of war that you're feeling in trying to prove this, then you're reclaiming your autonomy. You can't logic someone out of a story that protects their ego. Boy, this is a hard one for me. Let me say that again. You cannot logic someone out of a story that they're using to protect your ego. Emotionally immature people or character disordered people twist facts so they can avoid shame. And your evidence is not going to open their eyes. It may actually threaten their self-concept. So you trying to somehow reach some part that they get it, it probably won't happen because they don't want to see that shift, because they don't want to take responsibility, and they certainly don't want to see themselves in that negative light. So think of this. You can't teach insight to someone who's invested in the denial. Here's number four. Silence often is showing self-respect, more self-respect than an explanation. Choosing not to engage is not passivity, it's preserving energy for what actually matters to you, like your peace, your healing, and your next step forward. So when you stop performing and you start to just be calm within yourself, you actually become untouchable. I know for a lot of us, it feels like we're not winning, that we somehow have given into their interpretation. No, it's actually when you are winning, it's when you become untouchable. Peace is louder than persuasion. And number five, standing in the truth is a great way for you to anchor your nervous system. So every time that you start to feel like you have to prove what's real, I want you to think about, what can I do to sort of calm myself down and remind myself that I know what's real. I don't need to prove to anybody what's real. So when you do that, you actually move from fight or flight to a more grounded presence. And that's when your confidence returns, not because you got that other person to believe in you, but because you believed in you. Because validation is what you regulate from the system within yourself first, and then it moves outside. You're going to never find peace in someone else's acknowledgement, only in your own alignment. So truth, firmly held and quiet, doesn't need to be defensive. It just simply is. Yeah, that reminds me, one of the situations, my ex loved to be provocative. He just loved to create all sorts of drama. And one of them is, we traveled a lot. And I know why I did it. It was my effort to sort of recapture intimacy with him. But as a result, we had to pack a lot. And he had this narrative. And I'm sure it actually felt like something he'd used with somebody else that he would pull out and use with me as a way to sort of, because it worked with this other person, he thought it would work with me. And he said, well, we know how much you like to pack. And he would like constantly bring it up as if I'm somebody who's taking like 5 pieces of luggage or something. The truth of the matter is I'm not an overpacker. I just usually had to carry all the technology. And I knew it was to evoke a defense in me. I knew it was to make me really like upset. And like I said, I felt like it was brought in from another relationship, that this was some argument that he had had with somebody else in his life. So I usually just laughed. I usually like, "Yep, you know me, I really like to pack a whole lot." And then I'd laugh it off and move away. And when I did that, what I did was I was reclaiming my power, and I was standing in the truth of the situation because I knew I didn't, and it wasn't going to make me feel shaky, and that wasn't going to change how I packed. I was going to go out and do it exactly the same way the next time. So that's an example of how when we know the truth and we're able to stand in it, not get defensive, not react, then we actually really throw a wrench in it for them, because their guideline, their goal was to create chaos. And you completely derailed that opportunity so that no longer can do that. So that's a really great way. Yeah, somebody's mentioning gray rock. Yeah, that's another version of, for those who don't know what gray rock is, that's when we use a calm, usually a non it's neutral, a calm, neutral response to respond to a provocative situation. Like maybe they're questioning, who did this? Who spilt this? Do you know who spilt this? And you're like, I don't know. You just simply say, not sarcastically, not from us angle to try to provoke them. You just say, I don't know, and walk away. But it takes practice to be able to use gray rock. And some people even suggest we use yellow rock or the Biff method. Again, that's Bill Eddy. It means brief, informative, friendly, and firm. I hate the word friendly. What he means really by that, he doesn't mean try to be friends with that person. He means be civil. Be Use the kind of response that you would use with a neighbor that you don't have any agenda with. So be brief, informative, civil is the word I like, but Biff stands for F, friendly, and firm. The last one is firm. So that's how to get into a situation that's provocative without losing your cool. I just kind of covered all of these highlights, but I would love to know. For those of you who are on other channels, I'm going to turn on the comments so that you can see what you guys are saying to each other. I would love to know where your biggest struggles are in these situations. What is it that I'm having a hard time. Oh, I hate it when it makes it, I can't see how to turn. Oh, there it is. What is it you guys would like to know me to, what kind of questions would you like me to take today? That would be really, really helpful. And thank you so much for joining. And if you don't follow me, I'd love you to follow me. Also, please consider liking this so that we can share it with more people. I was watching another creator yesterday. She has a big following. She had like 1,000 people on a live, and she was hitting 179,000 likes. I thought that's really amazing. So thank you so much, you guys. I got 12,000, almost 13,000 likes on this. I really, really deeply appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing it with people you think it really would be helpful. I know last week I ran it right up to the top and you guys didn't have a chance to ask me any questions. So today I'm able to take your questions. And while I'm waiting for some questions to come in, let me tell you what next week's topic is, because for those of you who are not familiar, I go live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. So that would be 2 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. for Eastern. And I always talk about the topic, some version of it that surrounds the podcast episode. So next week, you're going to be hearing from the guest is going to be Jessica Baum. Jessica Baum has a new book out. She's a best-selling author. She has a new book out called Safe. She previously wrote a best-selling called Anxiously Attached. And she now has a new book out called SAFE. It's an attachment form guide to building secure relationships. So she's going to be my guest next week. And we're going to be talking about on our live here, we're going to be getting into why you're picking the wrong person. We're going to be getting into everything related to what happens within us psychologically that makes us get into relationships that seem to look a lot alike, even when we're really trying not to. So I hope that you guys will join me next week for that. So questions for me. What's my best what's my best advice to stay strong and keep moving on? I still have things that trigger me from the past. I think it really helps to look at what is triggering you and why it seems to be bothering you, kind of maybe for you to sort of slow down and ask yourself what it is that makes you feel threatened. Maybe you might find that you know almost use this as a way to like journal to it, free associate and journal. I feel really triggered when, and then allow yourself to just sort of imagine, or when it right after it happens, find some quiet time that day and see if you can pause and then write on it. I have a feeling if you did some digging, you'll find out there's something happening that's making you feel scared. Maybe it's making you feel insecure, or it's a reminder of an old injury, and you're being triggered because you're trying to you're managing the past in this present moment, which really doesn't work very well. Someone just asked, how can you where can I find the podcast? The podcast is Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. It's wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Amazon, um, Apple, it's wherever you listen, but it's also on YouTube. So if you want to watch a video of it, see the actual guest, check out the YouTube for it. So questions are coming in now on TikTok. Let me take the questions. Mine uses financial extortion. Nothing works, but I need the money to pay the bills. So what I hear is what happens with you, Cindy, is that he brings up that he's not going to provide for you. And then that's the way he sort of shuts it down and leverages that. Yeah, that's fascinating. And you're right. That's a really great way to shut you off because you need the money because if you're living on his income, then you are dependent on it. And that's why it works. What I'm thinking, and this is not easy, I don't have a really easy answer for you, but what I'm thinking is there a way for you to remove that lever, that the way for you to, for that not to be such a powerful hold? Um, it would take some tricky thinking. If you're not having a job outside the home, it would be really, really hard. But I would find a way to disempower that leverage. That's what I did was as I identified what the goal was, why it was powerful, and then I found a way to make it not powerful. One way is to not care, but I know it's difficult when you're talking about paying bills to like support the family. Yeah, Jenny asked, I still catch myself over explaining after living defensively for years. I do too. So the way that I stop that is I first of all identify in myself how I know that I'm over explaining. Usually I feel like a rush in myself. And then when I feel that rush, then I say, ooh, I'm probably saying more than I need. And often I recognize that I'm usually trying to get validation, like support from the other person. So I identify what it is I want in the other person. And then once I identify that, then I can say, oh, you know what, Kerry, you can do this for yourself. And that usually immediately takes the pressure off for me. Another question. I can't handle that head wobble when my logic knows, but the cognitive dissonance, but even though my logic knows it, I don't seem to know it. It's really awful. Is there any tips? Yeah. So have you read Dr. Ramani's book? It's not about you, or it's not you. I'm trying to remember the title. Any of you guys know the title? I'm sure you'll hop in and help me with it. But she recommends what she calls stacking truths. I really like that. That multiple truths can be true at the same time. We can't have somebody who says they love us but acts hateful towards us. Or we can have someone we can love somebody but also it's sometimes really hate them. So sometimes it really helps to name the conflicting truths that are stacking on top of each other as a really great way to stop the head wobble. Yeah, it's not you. Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that. Is a really great way to stop the wobble that you're feeling. Okay. So this came on Facebook. What's the best word of advice to stay strong? Oh, I already answered this. To stay strong, keep moving on. I did answer that one. What's other questions that might be there? Yeah, I'm glad you guys like cars. It is a really great, yeah, connect with calmness, analyze your options, set limits. It's a really great technique to do that. Yeah, sometimes it helps to prep grounded responses, to actually have them in ready to go. That can be very, very helpful. So that's what I often do is if I know I'm going into a situation where it's really tricky, I often will say to myself, okay, what might be asked or what situation might I be put in and what could I be able to say right away in that moment that will regulate me and give me a really great response that looks supportive, looks kind, but doesn't like box me in any way. So I'll actually practice them in my head. And by the way, I know that I know that you guys may feel like practicing it in your head is not the same of having you do it in real life, but it actually is. They've done research on that and found that practicing these responses is almost as powerful as getting to do it in person. So it's a great way to prepare is to practice in your head. Can I say more about the emotionally immature person? They're almost diabolical. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that star that there are people who do this for various reasons. There are some people who don't know that they're lacking the wherewithal to regulate their emotions. They are out of touch with themselves. They don't recognize when they're projecting or they're offloading whatever it is they're feeling. They just don't know. They're like literally sort of like checked out of themselves. It's like that part of themselves that should be reflective just isn't there. But then there are people who actually are aware of what they're doing and they want to stir up drama and chaos. And then there's people who are actually going out there and they're grooming you. They're actually predatorily moving in on you. So I see this as sort of a range of intentionality. I think that's the best way to think about it. A range of intentionality. There are those who are just inept, social or kind of socially immature or emotionally immature, and then there are people that I would agree with you. I would use your word diabolical. I think there are people who are quite sadistic and they're intentionally harming people because it gives them pleasure. So it's kind of interesting to watch out what's motivating this individual. Um, I jumped all the way to the front because I was way, 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 way behind. So I jumped to the front in TikTok. So I'm kind of reading for questions here. Can you speak more about the Yeah, I just did that. Thank you, Star. So that I saw that question came up more than once. I appreciate you. Thank you guys. When you see that I don't answer them, do ask me again. It really does help. Is there a good way to deal with night terrors that are stemming from the abuse? Ooh. First of all, can I just put my heart out to you for that? That sounds super tough. And I'm sorry to hear that you're struggling with that. I'm not a specialist in night terrors, but let me tell you a little bit of what I do and know about it. So there are different stages of sleep, and maybe CJ, you already know all this, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating something that is, it's maybe you've talked to a doctor and you've gotten some advice. But for those who don't know, when you first go to sleep, you move into stage two, which is if you woke up in stage two and asked, "Are you asleep?" You probably say no. You're still thinking, but you've actually started to doze. That's that time when people catch you snoring like you're sleeping. "No, I'm not." Yeah, you're already breathing really heavily. Then you move into stage 3, which is deeper, and finally go to stage 4. Stage 4 is a deep reparative sleep. That's the restorative sleep. And if you don't get enough stage 4 during the night, you'll wake up the next morning and feel sluggish and not good. That's a clue that you didn't have a lot of this really deep restorative sleep. When you're a child and growing, it's when they release the growth hormone. And when you're adult, that's when your body's repairing itself. That's why you just don't feel good the next day. But it goes through these cycles, literally like these waves, these cycles. And after stage 4, it pops back up to stage 2. But stage 2 this time is REM. That's the dream state. And in dream state, your body actually is paralyzed so that you don't act out. They actually did studies where they kind of overrid the paralysis in a cat and they saw them like act out their dreams. It's really wild. But in that, you're having these dreams. And in the beginning, the dreams are really short. And as the night gets longer or older, the dreams get longer and longer. That's why the last dream feels so long. It was a big dream. The dream does several things. It's your body's way of making sense of stuff. It's also kind of dealing with the clutter in your brain. It's usually doing some memory consolidation. So there are a lot of important things that happen during our sleep. Now, what happens with night terror? You think it's happening during your REM sleep, you're dreaming. No, it's happening during your deepest sleep. During the stage 4, you're having night terrors. And I don't know what triggers this. And I'm not for sure exactly what can help it. But here's some thoughts. Like I said, I'm not an expert in this. Here's some thoughts that maybe might assist in this. I would suggest start to journal before you go to bed about what's been on your mind and stressing you for that day. See if you can use that as a wind down to prepare yourself for sleep. I'd also urge you not to use any chemicals that might somehow make sleep harder or less deep or restorative. So be very careful about any kind of substances that you might be using. Don't necessarily see them as a way to make it better. It probably won't make it better. It may actually make things worse. Some of the substances we like to fall into are actually depressants, and it's more like may more likely to make you more depressed. But see the journaling as a possible way to sort of just like to purge the system so to get it out. I would also urge you to keep a dream journal. I know some of us say, "Well, I don't sleep." Yeah, I dream. Yes, you do. Everybody dreams. What's happening is you're not remembering your dream. But if you ask yourself, "I'd like to remember the dream," just even give yourself kind of considered a like a hypnotic suggestion. You'll It's amazing how you it can help. And also consider setting your alarm 15 minutes earlier than when you normally wake to see if you can break into the dream before it ends. So often we'll remember it if we're woken up out of a dream. So those are some ways to remember, and consider starting to write a dream journal down as a way to keep track of big themes, common struggles, common conflicts that might really give you some insight. So those are some things that might help. And I also would recommend, have you considered seeing a therapist just to deal with the post traumatic stress symptoms that you might be having as a result of being in a dangerous situation, of being in an abusive situation? All of that can kinda help you re-regulate your system. Oh, someone said, "I heard the tactic of setting alarm before is to prevent a dream." That's interesting. I haven't heard that. My thought is if you can we have your dream if you have a very stable sleep habit, go to bed a certain time, you wake up at a certain time, your body's got a rhythm that it's in, and if you disrupt that, you're more likely to break into a dream. Yeah, someone just asked, I'm feeling emotionally abandoned from the emotion. I'm sorry, I'm feeling abandoned from the emotional whiplash. When you say that to me, what it already indicates is that is your part I want this is partly a question to you. Do you think your partner wants you to feel abandoned? Do you think the emotional whiplash you're experiencing is intentional to create distance and turmoil in your relationship? What I've noticed is that people who have emotional immaturity or low emotional intelligence, or they have some type of a pathology like a character disturbance, they don't want closeness with us. And they use the chaos and confusion as a way keep keep it, keep themselves from being invested, keep you from being close to them. So the reason you may be feeling that abandonment is because it's real. There's this I often quote this because it was so powerful to me, so I wanna pass on something that was really useful to me to think about that might be useful to you, and that is, "The person with the greatest investment has the least power." Dr. David Schnarf in his book, The Passionate Marriage, said that. "The person who has the greatest investment in the relationship holds the least power." So if you're feeling emotionally abandoned, that means you feel you're being very disempowered. And I suspect your partner wants you to lose power. So the way for you to take it back is to care less. Match their energy. If they're not putting work in it, maybe it's time for you to stop, maybe it's time for you to think about stop putting in so much work with yourself on that relationship. I know that's a real hard thing to hear, but it might be a great way for you to change the leverage so that you have more power in this relationship. Match their investment. Boy, I'll tell you, I put so much of myself in that relationship. I worked so hard to trying to save it. But more I worked, almost like feeling like he was he was escaping from me. It was what he wanted. So he really wanted me disempowered. He wanted the distance in the relationship. Yeah, so she says he went from going to rehab to fix himself to come back to us to walking away. Wow. I'm sorry. That's very, very painful. And I bet you do feel like you're getting whiplash. Yeah, for sure. It sounds like your partner doesn't even know for sure what he wants. He's and he may be doing it for outside motivations. You know what I'm saying? In other words, he may feel like he has to put up a good front, or maybe it's what the community expects from him, but may not really be where his heart is. And so you're seeing that lack of authenticity, real like authentic engagement as a defensive mechanism. Yeah, someone's talking about that maybe narcissism is also a spiritual issue. And I do wonder about that. I don't know if you guys I'm getting ready for an interview tomorrow. I'm interviewing tomorrow Don Hennessy. He wrote the book How He Gets Into Her Head, and lately I've been mentioning it a lot because I'm wrapping the book up, and I'm so excited about this interview. I really wanted to meet him, and I can't wait to tell you guys how it goes. I won't show it for quite a while. It's going to be several months before it goes live. But Don Hennessy says that he was quoting another, I think a psychologist who says that psychology dumps these big questions into theology, but never tries to answer them. So it may be that there is definitely a spiritual component. So Heather is asking, I appreciate this question, Heather, and this is a common problem people struggle with, is if I understand it correctly, a dismissive, avoidant, covert narcissist is created from an environment where there is an emotional lack of attunement from the caregiver, but was present, but not was controlling, but not really present. So that's a complex question you're kind of asking. First of all, there's so many theories of psychology that kind of overlay each other. They're not mutually exclusive. They often happen simultaneously. So you're talking about attachment theory. So that's one way to understand connections, but it doesn't really explain narcissism as a whole. Because if it was true, then everybody who had a dismissive, avoidant attachment style would be narcissistic. So it's not an explanation for narcissism. Does narcissists who are covert more likely to have a dismissive avoidant attachment? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's research that suggests that. But the attachment style itself doesn't create the disorder. There's a lot of theories about why those disorders get created. And I think the best explanation, and I was just listening to a interview with Brad Carr this week with a psychologist that really believes in his model was more understanding it from an interpersonal standpoint, kind of like from an upbringing standpoint. I think there's several things that have to kind of happen together to create a narcissistic person or a personality disorder. You have to have a biological component. In other words, there has to be some psychological weakness in that person's psyche, in their emotional strength. For example, they probably are impaired around empathy. They probably have a hard time being flexible in their ability to think of outside of themselves, to consider other people's perspectives. They probably are not very self reflective. They probably struggle with impulse control, and they're probably struggling with judgment. So they're having an innate, hardwired neurological weakness. You've all seen how babies are very different. Some babies, they have the sunlight in their eyes, they know to roll their face away. Other babies will sit there and cry as if there's no solution to this at all. Babies come into the world with a preset hardwiring personality that we can either strengthen or we can make it worse. So I think there's some biological underpinnings, some like presets that make this really difficult. Then you get into an environment that doesn't know what to do with this lack of ego strengths, these struggles, maybe for lots of reasons, maybe just because that environment wasn't equipped, maybe because there was other trauma or drama happening, like maybe a medical illness in the family. Maybe it was just a mismatch between parental style and that child's needs. But there are lots of reasons why misattunement happens, not just because caretakers are inadequate. It could be just because they were stressed, overburdened, sick, because it was not a good match between caregiver and child. So, for whatever reason, the child who has this not strong psyche, strong psychology, ends up with some type of a misattunement in the family. It even could be a family that overly worships one kid, really makes them feel like they're godlike or better than, encourages a superiority. But whatever reason, this child end up then becoming this environment helps strengthen that struggle. And then you add the fact that life happens. It could be any kind of life that may strengthen these difficulties. Maybe the kid was kind of bullied, or maybe they're small and got picked on a lot, or maybe they were in a home where there was just a lot of activity and they got overlooked. But there's just stuff that goes on that makes it, kind of adds to that and builds on it. So I think what happens, and I know this almost feels like to me a cop-out answer, but it's a biosocial problem. There's biology, and then there's what happens socially, relationally, and the combination comes together to help create a person who has significant emotional immaturities. So that's a long answer to say I don't think it's just simply an attachment disorder. A lot of us, and by the way, is a fantastic book. If you really want to understand attachment disorders from a specialist, do I have his book here? Yes, I do. This book If I can get my chair back. Doesn't want to roll. This book, Becoming Attached, by Dr. Robert Karen, Karen, is amazing. It's thick. I want to warn you, it's thick, but it's approachable. You can really read this book. Anybody can read this book and make sense of attachment theory. And he really breaks it down. It's fun, but believe it or not, it's a fun read. I've recommended it to patients. It's very, very helpful. So if you'd really like to understand what happens with attachment theory, I highly recommend Becoming Attached by Dr. Robert Karen. So I know that was a big, big answer to your question of is it possible a covert narcissist is made by a dismissive avoidant personality or attachment style? There's a lot of us who have a dismissive avoidant. I was actually a part of a research study for 2 years. I participated in a regular where they asked me questions every 6 weeks about my primary relationships, and I took a personality inventory, and they answered questions about what was happening in my life. And then they gave me access to the results of it. And you could see how every quadrant, like secure, avoidant, uh, anxious and disorganized, you can see me floating around depending on what was going on in my life, depending on what was happening with me psychologically, what happened in that relationship. So it really varied. So that's the thing I want you guys to all hear is that attachment styles are not fixed, they're changeable. It depends on a lot of variables. It depends on that person, that relationship, and they're also not fixed to your life. You can get better. So yeah, I agree. Bowlby, Bowlby, is one of the main researchers who was kind of looked at attachment theory. Also, Ainsworth is another big name, another huge researcher in this arena. So Bowlby wrote a lot. So you can actually find his work as well. But if you want a summary of Bowlby and Ainsworth work, Dr. Robert Karen does a very, very nice job with that. All right, guys, thank you so much for this really great discussion. I'm glad we had time today for me to hang out with you and take your questions. I want to let you know that if you're on YouTube, I'm intending to just spontaneously try to go live just because I know usually I'm always scheduled, but I want to just start to try to see what happens if I do a vertical live. I can now do that, I think. So I want to just try to give it a try. So be aware of that. That's another reason why you should subscribe and turn on notifications, because if I do that, then you can say, "Ooh, she's on." You can jump on and hang out with me. All right, you guys, Teen Care, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. We're all about caring for each other, showing compassion for each other, resiliency, authenticity. I just deeply, deeply appreciate you guys being with me, and empowerment. We're all about those things. So thank you for hanging out with me today. We'll be back next week talking about why we pick bad people, why our pickers seem to be broken when we pick people. So I'd love to have you get back with me next week to get into that with me. All right, you guys, take care, and I will see you then.